Today, we are bringing you a special coverage report instead of your usual podcast episode. We're digging into a story about AI, the Pentagon, and a fight that has huge consequences. It's a complicated situation, and to unpack it, I'm handing it over to our investigative reporter, Bob. Bob, take it away.
I'm Bob. For the past week, I've been pulling a thread on a story that, on the surface, is about a contract dispute. But when you pull it, you find something else entirely. You find the Pentagon blacklisting a major American AI company, using a designation typically reserved for a Chinese military firm. Why? Because the AI company, Anthropic, refused to remove two safety guardrails from its military contract. The first, no mass surveillance of American citizens. The second, no fully autonomous weapon systems without a human in the loop. The Pentagon said these safeguards were unacceptable. They killed the deal. And then just hours later, they gave a nearly identical deal to Anthropic's biggest competitor, OpenAI, a deal that included the exact same restrictions. So here's the thing. This isn't just a story about a contract. It's a story about power, about who gets to decide how this technology is used. And what I found is complicated. So what's actually going on here? Let's start from the beginning. In July of 2025, the Pentagon announced it was spending $200 million. Look at this. They signed 2-year deals with 4 of the biggest names in AI: Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, and Elon Musk's xAI. The goal was to prototype what they call frontier AI for national security purposes. Now, Anthropic's AI model, named Claude, was unique. It was already operating inside the Pentagon's classified networks, the only one of the 4 to have that level of access. From the very beginning, Anthropic's contract included what it called an acceptable use policy. It laid out 2 hard lines: no using Claude for mass domestic surveillance, and no using Claude for autonomous weapons that could kill without human oversight. The Pentagon agreed to these terms, and to be clear, Anthropic did allow a huge range of military applications: missile defense, cyber defense, intelligence analysis, battlefield communications, logistics. The 2 red lines were narrow, specific prohibitions, and they were the same restrictions that existing U.S. law and DoD policy already reflect. We'll come back to that. For 5 months, things were fine. Then, in December 2025, came a phone call. The call was between Pentagon Undersecretary Emil Michael and Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei. Michael, a Senate-confirmed official, posed a hypothetical. An enemy nuclear ICBM is heading for the United States. Impact in 90 seconds. Could the military use Claude to shoot it down without asking permission first? Now, the 2 sides give very different accounts of this call. Here's how the Washington Post reported it. The Pentagon claimed Amodei was dismissive, that he said something like, quote, "You could call us and we'd work it out." Anthropic's response? They called that account, quote, "patently false." They say they explicitly told the undersecretary that missile defense was already allowed under the existing contract. And this is where it gets interesting, because the ICBM scenario was just a framing device. What the Pentagon really wanted was to remove both of Anthropic's red lines entirely. Mass surveillance, autonomous weapons. They wanted to use Claude for, quote, all lawful purposes. No company veto. Here's the NPR reporting on what happened next. On February 24th, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth met with Amodei and gave him an ultimatum: drop the safeguards by Friday or face the consequences. Those consequences were severe. Losing the contract was just the start. Hegseth threatened to designate Anthropic a supply chain risk, and he threatened to invoke the Defense Production Act. Now, the Defense Production Act. This is a Korean War-era law designed to compel private companies in times of national emergency. Think steel mills producing tanks, factories retooling for wartime production. It has never been used against an AI company. Here's the lawfare analysis. They called the threat unprecedented and legally dubious. Publicly, Hegseth started attacking Anthropic's safety policies as, quote, woke AI. 2 days later, on February 26th, Dario Amodei published a defiant statement. Here it is. He wrote, quote, "These threats do not change our position. We cannot in good conscience accede to their request." End quote. He argued that AI-driven mass surveillance presents serious, novel risks to our fundamental liberties, and that current AI systems are not reliable enough for fully autonomous weapons. That same day, Anthropic formally rejected the Pentagon's best and final offer. They said it, quote, made virtually no progress on preventing Claude's use for mass surveillance. The lines were drawn. Now, I want to be upfront. The Pentagon's argument here isn't entirely without merit. Let me give you the strongest version of their case. From their perspective, a private company should not have a veto over how the military uses technology, especially technology deemed critical to national security. The military operates under the law. It is commanded by a civilian, the president. If an action is lawful, a tool provider shouldn't be able to stand in the way. Amelia Michael put it bluntly. You can't have an AI company sell AI to the Department of War and not let it do Department of War things. And there's a real operational concern here. Military scenarios are unpredictable. An AI restriction that seems reasonable in peacetime might be catastrophic in a crisis. The Pentagon needs flexibility. War doesn't wait for contract amendments. Look at this reporting on the ultimatum. The other AI companies, Google, Meta, XAI, all accepted the Pentagon's terms. They agreed to let their AI be used for any lawful purpose. Anthropic was the outlier. The holdout, a senior Pentagon official told Axios, quote, "The problem with Dario is, with him, it's ideological. We know who we're dealing with," end quote. That's the Pentagon's case, and it's not nothing. But here's where it breaks down. Anthropic wasn't refusing all military use. They allowed extensive military applications. The dispute was over two specific capabilities. And those two capabilities, mass surveillance of Americans and weapons that kill with no human making the final call, are not abstract concerns. Current AI systems hallucinate. They make confident errors. Those are legitimate technical and constitutional objections. You can disagree with Anthropic's position, but it's not woke. It's a technical assessment about reliability and a constitutional concern about surveillance. And this is where it gets interesting. On Friday, February 27th, it all happened fast. That morning, Trump posted on Truth Social. Here's the coverage. He ordered all federal agencies to immediately stop using Anthropic. 6 months to phase out, no negotiation, done. Almost simultaneously, Undersecretary Emil Michael went on X. Look at this. He posted, calling Dario Amodei a liar with a God complex. This is a Senate-confirmed Pentagon official publicly insulting the CEO of a company he's supposed to be negotiating with. This is not how defense officials typically handle contractor disputes. Then the story gets stranger. According to CBS News, Michael was literally on the phone offering Anthropic one last deal at the exact same time his boss, Secretary Hegseth, was publicly tweeting out the blacklisting. Now, that's a single source report from CBS, so I want to be upfront. We treat it as reported, not confirmed. But it paints a picture of chaos, or deliberate bad faith. At 5:01 p.m. Eastern, the deadline passed. Secretary Hegseth formally designated Anthropic a supply chain risk to national security. Now, you have to understand what this designation means. Here's how the media covered it. It has never, ever been applied to an American company. This is the same classification applied to Huawei, to Chinese military-linked companies, to entities the U.S. government considers threats to national security. And it doesn't just kill Anthropic's Pentagon contract. It effectively forces every single company that does business with the Department of Defense to certify that they do not use Anthropic's technology. Thousands of companies affected for a contract negotiation disagreement. And then, that same evening, something remarkable happened. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman announced a new Pentagon deal. Look at this. He said OpenAI's models would now be available inside the Pentagon's classified networks. And then came the twist. Altman claimed the deal included the exact same red lines that Anthropic had fought for. No mass surveillance, no autonomous weapons without human approval. And the Pentagon agreed. Same terms, same restrictions, different company, different outcome. A source familiar with the deal told reporters the restrictions simply reflect existing U.S. law and the Pentagon's own policies. Let that sink in. The Pentagon's own policies already prohibit what Anthropic was trying to prevent. If that's true, why was Anthropic blacklisted? There are a few other pieces of this story that nobody's really talking about. First, Emil Michael. Before his Pentagon role, he was the chief business officer at Uber during the Travis Kalanick era, the most controversial period of that company. He was the one who, back in 2014, floated the idea of hiring opposition researchers to dig into the personal lives of journalists critical of Uber. It became a scandal. He was eventually pushed out. He has deep ties to the Silicon Valley tech ecosystem. Investor and advisor to SpaceX, his very personal public attacks on Amodei are highly unusual for a defense official. Second, the bipartisan response. And this is significant. Here's what happened. Senator Mark Warner, vice chair of the Intelligence Committee, said the directive raises, quote, serious concerns about whether national security decisions are being driven by careful analysis or political considerations. Senate Armed Services Committee Chair Roger Wicker, a Republican, joined with Ranking Member Jack Reed, a Democrat, along with Mitch McConnell and Chris Coons, to send a private letter urging resolution. When McConnell and Reed agree on something, pay attention. That almost never happens. Other members called the Pentagon's handling, quote, sophomoric. And third, there was a revolt inside the other AI labs. Look at this. Over 300 Google employees and more than 60 OpenAI employees signed an open letter urging their own companies to back Anthropic. Think about that. Employees of Anthropic's direct competitors publicly sided with Anthropic against the Pentagon. Here's the TechCrunch coverage. The letter said, quote, they're trying to divide each company with fear that the other will give in. That strategy only works if none of us know where the others stand. End quote. Even the people who would commercially benefit from Anthropic's exclusion don't want these restrictions removed. All right, here's what I think is actually happening. And I want to be very clear, this is opinion, not reporting. This is where I'm reading between the lines. I don't think this was about the ICBM scenario. I don't think this was about national security. If it were, the Pentagon wouldn't have granted OpenAI the exact same restrictions hours later. This was about one thing. Who decides how AI is used? The company that builds it or the government that buys it? And the answer the Trump administration chose was clear. The government decides. Period. No debate, no negotiation, submit or be destroyed. Anthropic didn't lose because their position was unreasonable. They lost because they refused to submit. They said no publicly and stuck to it. And in this political environment, public defiance cannot go unpunished. Look at the language. Woke AI God complex. Liar, this isn't policy disagreement. This is punishment for defiance. The supply chain risk designation is the tell. Using a tool designed for Huawei against an American AI safety company is like using a cruise missile to settle a zoning dispute. The disproportionality is the point. It's not a bug, it's the message. The message to every other tech company was simple. This is what happens when you say no. And it worked. Because while Anthropic is preparing to fight in court, OpenAI is signing deals with the classified network. The chilling effect is already operational. Every AI company board is having a conversation right now about what happened to Anthropic and whether they can afford to be next. Here's what to watch. Anthropic has announced they will challenge the supply chain risk designation in court. This could become a landmark case. If Anthropic wins, it establishes that the government can't weaponize procurement designations as punishment. If they lose, every AI company in America just learned a lesson about saying no. Congress is paying attention. If bipartisan senators push legislation requiring human-in-the-loop for autonomous weapons and restricting AI surveillance of Americans, this story changes completely. The irony would be thick. The Pentagon's overreach could end up producing the exact legal restrictions it was trying to prevent. And keep an eye on the 6-month phase-out period. That's how long government agencies have to stop using Claude. A lot can happen in 6 months. Administrations have reversed course before when the political cost gets high enough. And that brings me to the final glaring contradiction at the heart of this story. The Pentagon threatened to invoke the Defense Production Act. By doing so, they were implicitly labeling Claude as essential to national security. So essential, they needed the power to compel its production. At the very same time, they labeled Anthropic a supply chain risk, which means the company is a danger to national security. You can't be both essential and dangerous. Unless the real goal was never about the AI at all. Unless the goal was simply to enforce obedience. That's what I found. I'm Bob. Keep asking questions.